wretched. I can't marry a poor man.
The elders often say, what looks like misfortune may be the seed of a blessing yet to bloom. That was the story of Adana, a young woman whose tears watered the soil of her destiny. In the small village of Umuaka, where the red earth glowed beneath the evening sun, Adana lived with her widowed mother, Mama Nkechi. Their mud house stood near the stream, surrounded by cassava plants and the scent of palm wine drifting from the market square. Every morning, Adana would sweep the compound barefooted, her brown skin glistening with dew, her hair tied in a simple scarf. She was 19 years old, gentle and hard-working, her laughter the only wealth her mother still had after her father's death. Yet, behind her smile lived a silent ache, the weight of poverty that mocked their dreams. Their village was one where a woman's worth was often measured by her husband's pocket, not her heart. Suitors had come for Adana, men with soft words but hungry eyes. And her mother rejected them all, praying for a man who would truly love her child. But as fate would weave it, love was not what destiny first brought. It was duty. One dry season evening, the village elders visited. Their footsteps carried both dust and decision. They came with an offer. Adana would marry Chuka, the poor palm wine tapper who lived near the forest. He was 32 years old, quiet, and often mocked for his ragged clothes and humble hut. Mama Nkechi wept when she heard it. Her voice broke like dry firewood. My daughter is too young to suffer as I did. But the elders reminded her that the family owed a debt, an old loan from years past when Adana's father fell ill and the community helped. They said Chuka had agreed to take the girl as his wife in exchange for clearing the debt. Refusal would bring shame to their name. The mother's heart bled, but poverty had already stolen her choices. Adana said nothing that night, sitting by the fire with her head bowed. Her mother's sobs echoed behind her, mixing with the whisper of crickets. She looked into the flames, tears reflecting the light, and whispered to herself, "If this is my path, let God walk with me." The wedding came without music. There was no lace gown, no photographers, only the sound of drums beaten softly and women humming songs of endurance. Adana's white wrapper was borrowed. Her beaded necklace had once belonged to her late grandmother. Chuka arrived in his worn shirt, carrying a small bag and 2 calabashes of palm wine. He smiled shyly when their eyes met, but Adana's heart did not move. She saw a stranger who held her future like a sealed envelope. When they tied the knot before the village shrine, a gentle wind passed, carrying dust and omen. An elder muttered, "The wind knows what men do not." That night, when they reached his small hut near the forest, Adana sat quietly as Chuka made a small fire. His home was poor but clean. A mat, 2 clay pots, and a wooden bench. He spoke softly, thanking her for coming, promising he would try to make her happy even if he had little. His words were kind, yet sorrow lingered in her heart. She stared at the roof patched with palm leaves, wondering if this was truly the life meant for her. As she lay down that night, the moonlight brushed her face like a mother's hand. She did not know that the man beside her, the poor palm wine tapper, was hiding a truth greater than gold. That truth, like the moon behind clouds, was about to change everything. The morning after the wedding, the cock crowed before dawn, and Adana woke to the soft sound of rain dripping from the thatch roof. Chuka was already gone, his tapping knife missing from the wall, his footsteps marked in the wet sand. She sat on the mat, staring at the empty room, her heart still heavy like an unspoken prayer. Outside, mist rolled across the trees, and the smell of palm wine floated faintly in the breeze. She rose, tied her wrapper, and stepped into the cold air. The forest near their home whispered with life, frogs croaking, birds singing, and distant laughter of other tappers returning from early work. She looked around the small compound, noticing how every corner of it spoke of struggle. A broken water pot lay beside the wall, a tired hen scratched the earth, and a single yam tendril climbed the fence like a child begging for light. When Chuka returned, his shirt soaked with rain, he greeted her gently. "Good morning, my wife," he said, his voice calm and low. "I brought something for you." In his hand was a small basket filled with fresh bush mangoes and a folded piece of cloth. She blinked, surprised. "For me?" she asked. He nodded, smiling. "A gift. My mother used to say a man must bring joy home, even if it is small." He spoke like a man who carried wisdom far deeper than his looks suggested. Adana forced a smile, thanked him softly, but her heart stayed guarded. She didn't hate him, she just couldn't yet see him. To her, he was still the poor man chosen for her, not the man chosen by love. Days turned into weeks. Chuka worked hard, leaving before sunrise and returning when the sun kissed the hills goodnight. He never raised his voice, never complained. He washed his own clothes, cooked when she was tired, and repaired things around the house with quiet hands. Slowly, Adana began to notice small details. How his eyes softened when he spoke, how he prayed every night before sleeping, how he gave the last piece of meat to her without being asked. One evening, while fetching water at the stream, her friend Ngozi teased her. "So, how is life with your palm wine husband?" Adana smiled faintly. "He is kind," she said. "Kindness does not fill a pot," Ngozi laughed. "You need a man with money." Adana looked at her reflection in the stream. Tired, yes, but peaceful. She whispered, "Maybe peace is a kind of wealth too." One evening, Chuka returned later than usual, carrying a wrapped bundle under his arm. "What is that?" she asked, curious. "A surprise," he replied, placing it on the table. When she opened it, she gasped. Inside were 3 yards of fine Ankara fabric, bright as morning sun. "But how?" she stammered. "You don't have money for this." He smiled faintly. "Some blessings are not seen, but they are real." He didn't explain more. That night, as she folded the fabric, she wondered who her husband truly was. There was something about his calm that did not fit the poverty around them, like a man hiding behind a mask. That night, the rain came again, heavy and unending. Thunder rolled over the hills as she lay beside him, her mind full of questions. Chuka whispered a prayer in the darkness, his tone filled with gratitude, not sorrow. "Why are you thanking God in this storm?" she asked softly. He smiled, "Because storms don't last forever." His words lingered in her heart long after he slept. Outside, lightning flashed through the trees, and Adana for the first time felt that perhaps her destiny had entered a quiet turning point. She just didn't know it yet. The days grew into moons, and the moons melted into seasons. Life in Chuka's hut began to find rhythm, even though poverty clung to them like a stubborn shadow. Each dawn the forest would call, and Chuka would vanish among the tall palms, his gourd slung over his shoulder, his knife shining faintly in the sun. Adana tended to their small garden, roasted cassava, and fetched water from the stream with other women. The villagers still whispered. "The beautiful Adana married a man of rags," they said. But her heart was slowly unlearning shame. There was something about Chuka's silence that gave her peace, something about the way he looked at the sunset, as though speaking to heaven. One evening she asked him, "Do you never tire of this life?" He smiled faintly, his eyes on the horizon. "Everything changes, Adana. Even dust becomes clay when rain comes." His words felt like poetry she didn't yet understand. She looked at him differently that night, wondering what lay beneath that calm, unbothered gaze. One afternoon, the village square buzzed with gossip. The rich merchant Chief Odunze was returning from Lagos with his convoy of jeeps. The women sang his praise, saying he brought gifts for the elders and built boreholes for widows. Adana watched from afar as the cars drove past, dust swirling in their wake. For a fleeting moment, her chest tightened. She imagined what life would be like married to such a man, silk dresses, full pots, gold jewelry, but the image faded as quickly as it came. That night, she told Chuka about the arrival of Chief Odunze. He nodded slowly, saying nothing. But as she turned to sleep, she noticed something unusual. His hands trembled slightly, and his gaze lingered long on the fire. For the first time, Adana sensed he carried memories heavier than he showed. One morning she followed him quietly into the forest, curious to see where he went every day. The path twisted through tall trees and silent streams until she reached a clearing she had never seen before. There stood a large wooden structure hidden among the palms, guarded by two men in plain clothes. She gasped and stepped back. Before she could flee, one of the guards approached, his tone respectful. "Madam, you shouldn't be here," her heart pounded. "Where is my husband?" she asked. The man smiled faintly. "He's inside, Ma. He said you might come one day." Then Chuka appeared, his face calm but his eyes serious. "Adana," he said softly, "you were not supposed to find this yet." Her voice shook. "What is this place?" He paused, looking at her with quiet affection. "A part of me I am not ready to reveal. Please, trust me." She wanted to ask more, but the calm authority in his tone silenced her. He led her back home, saying little. That night, as crickets sang outside, she lay awake beside him, her mind restless. What kind of palm wine tapper had guards? Days later, during the village festival, a quarrel erupted between Chief Odunze and the elders over land disputes. The chief insulted the villagers, boasting that his wealth made him untouchable. The crowd murmured in anger but said nothing. Chuka stood quietly at the edge of the square, his arms folded. When Odunze sneered at Adana's simple wrapper as she passed, Chuka's jaw tightened, though he said nothing. Later that night, he sat outside their hut, eyes glowing in the firelight. "Some men think money makes them gods," he said quietly. Adana looked at him, curious. "And you?" she asked. "What makes a man?" He smiled gently. "A man is measured not by what he has, but by what he can lose and still remain himself." She didn't fully understand, but something about his words stirred her soul. Then, one fateful morning, the chief's men came riding through the village, boasting of their master's power. They pushed aside a poor farmer's cart, trampling his yams, and laughed. Chuka stood up from where he sat weaving palm fronds. Without raising his voice, he told them to respect the old man. The guards mocked him. One spat on the ground before him. The villagers froze, expecting Chuka to walk away. Instead, he spoke calmly. "Tell your master the day will come when the poor will dine in his halls." They laughed and rode off, leaving dust and echoes behind. Adana stood there, heart pounding, realizing for the first time that her husband's quietness was not weakness. It was control, the kind of control that comes from power hidden beneath humility. That night, as they lay under the stars, she turned to him and whispered, "Chuka, who are you?" He smiled in the darkness. "One day you'll know, my wife. But when that day comes, remember, I never wanted riches to change the way you see me." She touched his hand gently, unsure what to say. The wind blew softly through the trees, carrying the distant drumming from the village square. She felt the pull of destiny moving around her, unseen but strong, like the tide beneath still waters. And so, without knowing, the girl who had been forced into poverty had already married the man who would one day rewrite the story of wealth in Umuaka. The sun rose red that morning, as though warning of things to come. The village stirred slowly, roosters crowing, children laughing in the distance, and smoke curling from clay chimneys. Adana woke to find Chuka gone again, his mat neatly folded beside her. She sighed, rubbing her eyes, and stepped outside. The forest air smelled of wet soil and promise, but her heart felt unsettled. Since the day she followed him into the hidden clearing, her sleep had not known peace. The secret he carried sat heavy on her chest like a stone she could not name. She went about her chores quietly, sweeping the compound, washing clothes, and tending to the small vegetable patch behind their hut. Her hands worked, but her thoughts drifted to questions she could not silence. Who was her husband, really? Why did the guards respect him like a master? Why did he live among the poor when he clearly was not one of them? The answers danced just beyond her reach, like smoke in the wind. Later that afternoon, Mum and Kichi came visiting, her wrapper faded, her feet dusty from the long walk. "My daughter," she said, settling down on the bench. "I heard your husband went to the city last week. Is it true?" Adana frowned. "No, Mama. He said he was going to the forest." Mama Nkechi nodded thoughtfully. I saw a man who looked like him in town, stepping out of a big black jeep. He wore a fine shirt and dark glasses. The women were whispering that he looked like one of those rich men from the city." Adana laughed weakly, trying to shake off the thought. "That cannot be my Chuka, Mama. Maybe he has a twin." But deep inside, her pulse quickened. Her husband had indeed left 3 days ago, claiming to visit another village to sell palm wine. She dismissed the thought with a smile, but doubt had already begun its quiet work in her mind. That evening, the rain returned, heavy and relentless. Chuka came home late, drenched to the skin, his face expressionless. He carried a small leather bag which he placed carefully beside the bed. "What's inside?" Adana asked softly. "Just tools," he said, smiling faintly. But as he undressed, she noticed a faint mark on his wrist, a golden bracelet half hidden beneath his sleeve, gleaming when lightning flashed. Her eyes caught it, and he noticed her gaze. Slowly, he pulled the sleeve down and said, "It's from long ago, a gift from someone I once helped." His tone was calm, but his eyes avoided hers. She nodded, saying nothing. That night, sleep refused to come. The sound of thunder outside felt like the echo of secrets beating against her heart. 2 days later, a strange visitor arrived, a tall man in a fine blue kaftan, driving a shiny SUV that stopped right at their humble gate. The villagers gathered, whispering, "Who could he be? Why stop at Chuka's house?" The man stepped out, adjusting his wristwatch, his shoes glistening with dust. "Good afternoon," he greeted. Adana came out nervous. "Good afternoon, sir." "I'm here to see Chuka," he said with a polite smile. "Tell him that Mr. Okeki is waiting." When Chuka appeared, wearing his usual torn shirt, the man bowed slightly. "Sir," he said in a low tone, "the board is ready. They await your final approval." The villagers stared, mouths open. "Sir?" someone whispered. But Chuka only smiled faintly and said, "We will speak later, Okeki. Go back to town. I will handle things here." The man nodded and left, his car roaring away, leaving clouds of red dust behind. Adana stood frozen, her heart pounding. The whispers spread through the village like wildfire. Chuka is not who we think he is. That night, Adana sat by the fire, her voice trembling. "You lied to me," she said softly. "You made me believe you were poor." Chuka looked at her, his eyes calm but sad. "I didn't lie," he said gently. "I only hid the truth until the right time. I wanted a wife who would love me for who I am, not what I have." Her tears fell silently. "But you deceived me," she whispered. "You made me a fool before everyone." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Adana," he said, "I was once like Chief Adunze, proud, careless, worshipping wealth. I lost everything before I learned what peace truly means. When I met you, I wanted to begin again. Not as a billionaire, but as a man." His words hung heavy in the room. She turned away, staring into the fire. "Then maybe I never knew you at all," she said quietly. Outside, the night grew colder. The villagers' murmurs reached their window. Adana's heart battled between love and betrayal, truth and hurt. She lay down, her back to him, as he sat silently, the firelight painting sorrow across his face. In the distance, thunder rolled again, as if heaven itself bore witness to a love shaken by truth. The morning dawned with an uneasy silence. The roosters crowed, but their call sounded distant, hollow, like voices from another world. Adana rose before sunrise, her heart restless. The hut felt smaller than usual, the air thick with unspoken tension. Chuka sat outside beneath the mango tree, watching the fog roll across the fields. He looked calm, but his eyes carried the weight of 1,000 thoughts. When she stepped out, he smiled faintly. "Good morning, my wife." She didn't reply. She simply poured water into the clay bowl and washed her face quietly. The silence between them was heavier than words. For the first time since their marriage, she felt like a stranger in her own home. Every kindness he had shown now felt like a carefully crafted disguise. The man she once thought poor had become a riddle wrapped in wealth and deception. By midday, word had spread like wildfire across Umuaka. Villagers gathered at the market square buzzing with disbelief. "So Chuka, the palm wine tapper, is a rich man," one woman exclaimed. "A billionaire hiding in the bush," another shouted, her laughter sharp with envy. Adana could feel their eyes on her when she passed by to buy salt. "See her," they whispered. "She married wealth by accident." Shame burned beneath her skin like fever. She hurried home, her hands trembling as she set the salt down. When Chuka returned that evening, he found her sitting alone, staring at the fire. "The people are talking," she said without looking up. "Let them talk," he replied softly. "They don't know the truth." She turned toward him, her eyes shining with tears. "Then tell me, Chuka, who are you, really?" He sat beside her, his expression grave. "My real name," he began slowly, "is Chuka Obiese, the son of the late Chief Obiese, one of the wealthiest men in Anambra. When my father died, his business empire fell into chaos. My brothers fought over inheritance, and greed destroyed our home. I left everything behind, the money, the cars, the city, to live simply and learn peace again." He paused, his voice heavy with memory. "I built the palm wine business quietly, using it to help the poor. I hid my wealth so I could see the truth in people's hearts." Adana listened in silence, her heart torn between awe and anger. "And you chose me," she whispered bitterly, "a poor girl to test me." He shook his head quickly. "No, I chose you because I saw light in you. You were pure, kind, and humble. You reminded me of what wealth could not buy." But her pain was stronger than his sincerity. "You made me live in poverty when you could have saved my mother from hunger," she cried. "You watched me fetch water, wear torn wrappers, and suffer shame, all while you sat on riches." Her words cut deep. He lowered his head. "I thought love must grow from truth, not comfort," he said quietly. "I was wrong." She turned away, tears blurring her vision. "Maybe you wanted to learn humility, but I learned humiliation." She rose and walked out into the night, her wrapper trailing in the wind. He didn't follow her. He simply watched her silhouette fade into the moonlit path, his chest heavy with regret. She walked aimlessly until she reached her mother's hut. Mama Nkechi rushed out when she saw her daughter crying. "What happened, my child?" Adana fell to her knees. "Mama, he deceived me. He's rich. He's been rich all along," Mama Nkechi gasped. "Rich? But why would a rich man hide his wealth?" Adana shook her head. "I don't know, Mama. Maybe to test me. Maybe to mock me." Her mother sighed deeply, holding her close. "My daughter," she whispered. "Sometimes God hides blessings behind pain, but you must not let anger blind you to destiny." Adana wept until dawn, her mother's words echoing in her heart like distant thunder. At sunrise, Chuka came for her. His face was pale from sleeplessness, his eyes red. "Adana," he said gently, "I came to take you home." But she shook her head. "I don't know if home still exists between us." He knelt before her, his voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt you. I only wanted a love untouched by wealth." Tears streamed down his face, tears she had never seen before. Mama Nkichi watched from the doorway, silent as the wind. "Go home, my daughter," she said softly. "A man who hides his wealth to seek peace may not be wicked, only wounded." Adana hesitated, then turned toward Chuka. "If you want forgiveness," she said, "earn it with truth." He nodded slowly, a flicker of hope in his eyes. As they walked back together, the village watched in silence. Some mocked, some envied, but a few understood. Love, like the rain, often begins as thunder. That evening, as they reached their hut, the sunset spread gold across the sky. Chuka took her hand and said, "Tomorrow I will show you everything." She looked at him, uncertain but curious. The truth hidden for years was finally ready to step into the light. And destiny, waiting patiently, was about to reveal why the poor man of Umuaka was never truly poor at all. The morning that followed was brighter than any Adana had seen in months. The sun rose golden over the palm trees, and the birds sang like messengers of fate. Yet, inside her heart, a storm brewed quietly. She sat on the bench outside their hut, her eyes distant, watching Chuka pack a few items into a small leather bag. "Where are we going?" she asked finally, her tone unsure. He looked up at her with a faint smile. "To the city," he said softly. "You deserve to see the truth with your own eyes." Those words hung in the air like a promise too heavy to believe. She tied her headscarf and followed him, her heart torn between curiosity and fear. When they stepped out of the village gate, the sound of the forest seemed to hush, as if even nature paused to listen to what destiny would say next. A black SUV was waiting by the road, polished and gleaming like a mirror. The driver jumped out immediately when he saw Chuka, bowing slightly. "Good morning, sir," he said. "The road is clear." Adana froze, staring at the car, then at her husband. "Sir?" she repeated under her breath. He opened the door for her gently. "Get in," he said, smiling. "You are safe." Her hands trembled as she stepped inside. The leather seats smelled of wealth she had never known. The journey was long, the road winding through fields, hills, and distant towns. As they drove, Adana stared out the window, the memories of their humble hut flashing in her mind, the clay floor, the smoke, the cracked pot, all now fading behind them. After hours of silence, the car turned into a wide gate guarded by uniformed men. Beyond it stood a grand mansion with tall white pillars, glass windows, and manicured lawns stretching as far as her eyes could see. Her mouth fell open. "Chuka, what is this place?" He looked at her quietly. "Home," he said simply. When the gates closed behind them, two maids rushed out to greet him, bowing respectfully. "Welcome, sir," they said. Adana stood frozen, her wrapper clutched tight around her. Her voice shook. "You live here?" Chuka nodded. "This was my father's house. I left it years ago to live as a common man." He turned to her gently. "And now, my wife, it belongs to you too." Tears welled in her eyes. She wanted to speak, but words failed her. He led her inside. The floor was marble, cool beneath her bare feet. Paintings hung on the walls, and the scent of roses filled the air. Servants bowed as they passed. Adana felt dizzy, like she had walked into another life. In the sitting room, Chuka gestured toward a large portrait, a younger version of himself standing beside an older man in a white agbada. "That's my father," he said. "He taught me that money without purpose is poison. When he died, I lost my way. Wealth turned me into a man I could not respect. So I left everything to find meaning again." Adana touched the frame gently, her heart torn between awe and guilt. "All this time," she whispered, "I thought I married a poor man." He smiled softly. "You married a man trying to remember what love means." Later that evening, he took her to a quiet garden behind the house. A fountain trickled softly, and lanterns glowed among the flowers. "Adana," he said, holding her hands, "I brought you here not to boast, but to share my truth. Everything I own, the lands, the company, the estate, it means nothing if I cannot share it with someone who saw me when I had nothing." Her eyes filled with tears. "But you tested me, Chuka," she said, her voice trembling. "You made me live a lie." He nodded slowly. "And I will spend the rest of my life earning back your trust." For the first time in weeks, she saw pain in his eyes. Real, unguarded pain. She stepped closer, her hand brushing his cheek. "I don't know if I can forget," she whispered, "but I can try to understand." He smiled faintly. "That is enough." Night fell softly over the mansion. The moonlight glowed on the marble floor as they sat by the balcony, silent, side by side. From the distance came the hum of the city, cars, laughter, and music, yet beneath it all, there was peace. Adana leaned her head on his shoulder, her heart finally slowing its storm. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "Out of all the women, why choose a poor girl from Umuaka?" Chuka's voice was low and sincere. "Because when I first saw you at the stream years ago, you shared your bread with a beggar while others mocked him. That day I knew wealth could not measure kindness. I wanted to be seen by such a heart." She turned to him, eyes wide. "You knew me before the marriage." He nodded. "I did. I only waited for the right time to find you again." Her lips parted in disbelief. The truth settled over her like dawn breaking through fog. The man she had thought fate forced upon her had, all along, been the man fate had written for her. She looked up at the stars and whispered, "Maybe God delays not to punish us, but to prepare us." Chuka smiled softly, repeating the words under his breath. "And when he finally moves," he said, "he rewrites everything." The night breeze brushed their faces gently as if heaven itself blessed their reconciliation. But destiny, still turning its wheel, was not done. For in the shadows beyond the mansion gate, unseen eyes watched them, eyes filled with envy and bitterness. The peace they had just found was about to be tested once again. The days that followed were painted in gold and shadow. Adana woke each morning in silken sheets, the air perfumed with jasmine, her world suddenly unrecognizable. Servants bowed when she passed. Maids carried her breakfast on silver trays. Yet, even surrounded by wealth, her heart remained half in the village, half in the hut, where love was humble and real. Chuka, now dressed in fine suits and polished shoes, spent his days attending meetings in the city, returning each night with quiet exhaustion. Sometimes she would catch him standing by the window, staring into nothing, the same faraway look she once saw when he was poor. "You still don't rest," she said one night, touching his arm. He smiled faintly. "Peace is not found in comfort, Adana. It's something we must protect." She didn't understand then, but she soon would. One afternoon, Adana decided to visit her mother. She rode in one of the jeeps, escorted by 2 guards. When the car entered the village, people poured out to watch, their mouths wide, their whispers sharp. "So the poor man's wife is now queen," some jeered. Others bowed and smiled, their greetings mixed with admiration and envy. Adana stepped down gracefully, wearing a simple but elegant wrapper. She hugged her mother tightly, tears in her eyes. "Mama," she whispered, "God has turned our story." Mama Nkechi smiled proudly. "He always does, my child. But remember, blessings carry their own tests." They shared a meal of yam and vegetables, and for a brief moment Adana felt peace again. But when she was about to leave, an old woman approached her. "My daughter," the woman said in a trembling voice, "beware of those who smile too wide. Riches attract snakes." The warning followed her home like a shadow. That evening, Chuka received visitors, 2 men in expensive clothes, one of whom Adana recognized from the day Mr. Okeki came to the village. Their conversation in the study grew tense. She overheard fragments. The deal, the land, the betrayal. When the men left, Chuka came out quiet and pale. She touched his arm. What happened? He forced a smile. Nothing to worry about, just business. But his eyes betrayed worry. That night he barely ate, his mind clearly elsewhere. Adana lay awake beside him, fear creeping through her chest like cold water. She had learned by now that wealth had its own kind of hunger, one that devoured peace faster than poverty ever could. Days later, the first strike came. The news spread that one of Chuka's companies had been sabotaged, money stolen, documents forged, deals broken. The board members were furious, some even accusing Chuka of mismanagement. Newspapers carried headlines calling him reckless. He said little, but Adana saw the quiet fire burning behind his calm. Who would do this? She asked. His jaw tightened. Those who cannot stand to see peace where they sowed chaos, he replied. That night he gathered his closest aides, instructing them to investigate. Among them was a man named Kelechi, sharp-eyed, loyal, but strangely cold whenever Adana was near. She noticed it the first day she met him, the way his gaze lingered too long, the faint smirk that played on his lips. There was something about him she didn't trust. Weeks passed, and the storm grew darker. Adana tried to comfort her husband, but he seemed buried under worry. This wealth brings enemies, she said one evening. Wouldn't you rather leave it all again and find peace in Umuaka? He smiled sadly. I could live without the money, but not with the guilt of abandoning the people who depend on me. His words reminded her of the man she first met, quiet, selfless, full of strange strength. She reached for his hand, whispering, "Then I will stand with you." He looked at her, eyes softening, and for a brief moment the world felt steady again. But that peace shattered the next morning. Chuka's car exploded just as the driver turned the key. Flames rose high into the sky, and screams filled the compound. Adana ran out barefoot, her voice breaking. "Chuka!" She fell to her knees, trembling. But by some miracle he had not entered the car yet. He stood a few meters away, shaken but alive. The guards rushed to him, shouting, "Sabotage! Someone planted a bomb!" The police came, reporters gathered, chaos erupted. In the confusion, Chuka turned to Kelechi, his most trusted aide, but the man was gone. Vanished. That night, as sirens wailed in the distance, Chuka held Adana close, his voice low but steady. "Now I know who is behind this," he said. "The battle I left years ago has returned." Adana wept softly. "Please, Chuka, promise me no more secrets." He looked into her eyes. "No more," he said. "But whatever comes next, remember, this love is the only thing they cannot destroy." Outside, thunder rolled once more over the city, echoing the promise of trials to come. The poor village girl who once swept a clay floor was now standing in a storm that would test not just her love, but her strength, her faith, and her destiny itself. The days that followed the explosion felt like a nightmare stretched into waking hours. The mansion that once echoed with laughter now sat heavy with fear. Security guards patrolled every corner, their eyes sharp, their guns always near. Adana barely slept. Each sound in the night made her flinch. Chuka moved through the house like a ghost, his mind consumed by betrayal. The news was everywhere. Television anchors and newspapers screamed headlines. Billionaire's empire under attack. Chuka Obieze linked to corruption scandal. What had begun as a business sabotage had grown into full-blown destruction. Accounts were frozen. Partners pulled away. The government launched investigations. Overnight, their empire began to crumble. Adana sat in silence most days, her prayers whispered through tears. She had never seen her husband so broken. One evening, she found him sitting alone by the balcony, his face buried in his hands. "You can leave if you want," he said softly without looking up. "This storm will swallow everything soon. She stepped closer, her heart aching. "Leave," she whispered. "You think I married you for your gold?" He looked up, eyes hollow. "No," he said, "but I brought you into a fire you never deserved." She knelt beside him, taking his hands. "I walked through poverty with you," she said gently. "I can walk through loss too." His eyes glistened. "Even if the world turns against me?" She nodded. "Even then." That night they prayed together, their voices trembling, their hearts bound by faith. But faith was not enough to stop the storm. The next week, Chuka's properties were seized. His cars, his offices, even the mansion were locked under government orders. Reporters camped outside the gate, shouting questions, snapping photos. Adana couldn't step outside without hearing insults. Greedy woman! She enjoyed stolen money. Her spirit broke piece by piece. One afternoon, the police arrived with papers, ordering them to vacate the house within 24 hours. She packed their few remaining clothes into a small suitcase, her tears falling silently. Chuka watched her, his expression unreadable. "Maybe this is how God humbles kings," he said bitterly. She looked up at him. "No," she whispered. "This is how he tests hearts." They left the mansion at sunset. No convoy followed them this time, only dust, wind, and silence. Chuka drove himself, his once luxurious SUV, now the last thing he owned. They returned to Umuaka, under a sky heavy with rain. The villagers watched as the car pulled up to the same hut they had once left behind. Some pitied them, others laughed quietly. "See how the mighty have fallen," one man whispered. Adana ignored them. She swept the compound herself, lit the fire, and cooked yam in a small pot. When Chuka came inside, the scent of food filled the air. "It's not much," she said shyly, "but it will fill the stomach." He smiled faintly for the first time in days. "It's everything," he said. They ate in silence, rain tapping the roof like an old friend returning. That night, when the fire burned low, Adana found him sitting outside, staring at the stars. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. "Regret what?" he said. "Choosing this path." He shook his head slowly. "No, I regret trusting the wrong men, but I don't regret finding the right woman." Her eyes filled with tears. "Then we start again," she said, "from nothing." He turned to her, a small smile breaking through his sorrow. "From nothing," he echoed. She took his hand, feeling the roughness of his palm, the same hand that once held power, now holding only faith. The next morning they rose before dawn. Chuka carried his tapping knife once more, walking toward the forest just as he had years ago. Adana watched him go, her chest tight with pride and pain. When he returned hours later, his hands were bleeding, his shirt torn, but his eyes were alive again. "The forest still knows me," he said with a tired smile. She laughed softly, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Then let it remember your strength." For the first time in weeks, laughter filled the hut, fragile but real. Still, not all storms end quietly. That evening, as they sat by the fire, a knock echoed at the door. Chuka opened it slowly, and standing there, drenched in rain, was Kelechi. His expression was cold, his eyes sharp with arrogance. "You thought you could escape me," he sneered. Adana gasped, her hands trembling. Chuka's voice hardened. "You betrayed me," Kelechi smirked. "You betrayed yourself. You trusted too much." He stepped forward, pulling a gun from his coat. Adana screamed, "Please, Kelechi, don't!" But Chuka didn't flinch. He stood tall, his voice calm as ever. "You've taken my wealth," he said, "but you will never take my peace." In that moment, thunder cracked across the sky, loud, violent, divine. A blinding flash of lightning struck a nearby tree, sending Kelechi stumbling backward. The gun slipped from his hand as he fell into the mud, terrified. Chuka stepped forward, picking up the weapon and tossing it into the fire. Rain poured harder, drowning the tension. Kelechi ran into the darkness, vanishing like a curse lifted. Adana fell into Chuka's arms, sobbing. God saved us, she whispered. He held her tightly. No, he said softly. He reminded us who truly saves. The storm outside faded to drizzle. The poor man and his wife sat together, soaked and trembling, but alive, stripped of riches yet clothed in grace. And though they didn't know it yet, that night marked the beginning of something greater. For in losing everything, they had rediscovered the only treasure that truly endures: love anchored in faith. The dawn that followed the storm carried a strange stillness. The air was cool and clean, as though heaven itself had washed away the night's terror. Adana woke before the first rooster crowed and found Chuka sitting outside again, staring toward the forest. The early light cast a pale glow over his face, making him look older, not in years but in burden. You didn't sleep, she said softly, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. He turned to her with a faint smile. Peace doesn't come easily after fire, he murmured. She sat beside him, their silence speaking the words neither could say. Around them the village slowly stirred to life. Women pounding yam, children fetching water, goats bleating in the distance. It was as though the world had moved on, yet something sacred had awakened in their hearts. For the first time since returning to the village, Chuka went to greet the elders. They welcomed him cautiously, still uncertain what to make of the fallen billionaire who once lived among them as a poor man. Life has a way of humbling kings, the oldest elder said, his voice raspy like dry leaves. But a humble man never truly falls. Chuka bowed his head. I came not as a king, he said, but as a son seeking wisdom again. The elders nodded approvingly. After the meeting, Chuka began teaching young men in the village how to tap palm wine safely, how to save their earnings, and how to trade without deceit. Soon word spread that the once rich man had returned to lift others. Adana watched him with pride, her heart softening with each passing day. Poverty no longer frightened her. She had seen how riches could destroy more than hunger ever could. At night, they would sit by the fire, sharing stories of their past. Sometimes Adana laughed until tears filled her eyes. Other times, the memories made her chest ache. I used to dream of lace gowns and gold necklaces, she said one evening. Now I dream of peace. Chuka smiled. Peace is the one thing we only learn when everything else is gone. She leaned against his shoulder, the flames dancing before them, shadows flickering on their faces. Do you think God will ever restore what we lost? She asked quietly. He looked at her for a long moment. God doesn't always return things, he said softly. Sometimes he replaces them with better ones. Her lips curved into a faint smile. Then maybe he's still working. Weeks turned into months, and the couple slowly became beloved again. The villagers who once mocked them began to seek their advice. Adana started teaching young girls in the community how to sew, using scraps of cloth she bought from the market. Her laughter returned brighter and freer. Each morning, when she looked at Chuka walking toward the forest, she no longer saw a man who lost everything. She saw a man who had found his purpose again. But fate, ever testing, was not done yet. One afternoon, as she prepared dinner, a convoy of government vehicles rolled into the village. Dust rose as officials stepped out, holding folders and cameras. The villagers gathered nervously, whispering, "Who are they looking for?" A tall man in a dark suit approached the hut. "Mr. Chuka Obieze," he called. Chuka stepped forward, calm as always. "Yes," he said. The man nodded respectfully. "Sir, after investigation, you have been cleared of all charges. The true culprits behind the fraud have been arrested, including one Mr. Kalechi." Adana gasped softly. "He confessed?" she asked. The man smiled. "Yes, madam. He admitted to orchestrating the entire plot." Chuka's shoulders sagged in relief. The official continued. "Your properties and accounts will be restored within the week. The government sends its apologies." The villagers erupted in cheers. Some shouted his name, others clapped and danced. Adana fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "God is faithful," she whispered. Chuka knelt beside her, his own eyes wet. "He delayed," he said softly. But he did not forget. That night, the village held a small celebration. Drums echoed through the air, fires burned bright, and laughter filled every corner. Yet, amidst the joy, Adana felt something different, a peace deeper than wealth, a contentment untouched by gold. Later, when they sat alone beneath the stars, she turned to her husband and said, "We have everything back now, but I don't want the mansion." He looked at her curiously. "What do you mean?" She smiled gently. "Let's rebuild our life here, where we began. Let wealth serve the people, not rule us." He gazed at her for a long moment, then nodded. "You have the heart of a queen," he said quietly. She laughed softly. "Then let me reign beside a man who wears humility as his crown." As the night deepened, the drums faded into silence. They sat hand in hand, watching the moon rise above the palm trees. The past was behind them, the future still unwritten. But for the first time, neither was afraid. In losing everything, they had found what truly mattered: faith, love, and peace that no thief could steal. The next morning dawned clear, the sky painted with streaks of gold and promise. The air smelled of wet earth after night rain, and for the first time in months, Adana felt no fear when she opened her eyes. She found Chuka already outside, sitting under the same mango tree where their lives had changed years ago. He held a small notebook, scribbling numbers and sketches. "You're working again," she said softly, stepping closer. He smiled. "Not for wealth," he replied. "For purpose." She sat beside him, watching his pen move. "What are you planning now?" He looked at her, his eyes bright with quiet vision. "A cooperative," he said. "A place where palm wine tappers, farmers, and traders can save, borrow, and grow without being cheated. We lost everything because others used power wrongly. I want to rebuild by giving it back the right way." Adana smiled, her heart swelling. "Then this time," she said, "I'll help." And so, they began again, with nothing but faith, determination, and the memory of what pride once destroyed. Chuka sold the last of his cars to buy land in the village centre. He built a small office with mud bricks and wood, painting the words Umwaka People's Trust Cooperative above the door. Adana trained the women to keep records and handle money safely. Within months, farmers and traders began to join. Men who once mocked Chuka now came to him for guidance. His quiet strength inspired them. His humility disarmed their envy. The cooperative grew faster than anyone imagined. Even neighbouring villages sent representatives to learn. Soon reporters returned, not to shame him this time, but to tell a story of hope. "From billionaire to villager, from villager to nation builder," one headline read. Adana laughed when she saw it. "They finally wrote the truth," she said. But with success came new challenges. The cooperative's growth attracted politicians and businessmen who sought to control it. One evening, a sleek car arrived from the city carrying a man named Chief Okonkwo, a powerful investor. "Mr. Obies," he said smoothly, "join forces with me. I can expand your project nationwide. You'll make billions again." Chuka listened quietly, then shook his head. "If I join you, the people will lose what makes this place pure." Chief Okonkwo frowned. "You'd turn down fortune for these farmers?" Chuka smiled faintly. "Yes, because true fortune is peace." The chief laughed mockingly. "Peace won't buy power." "Neither will greed," Chuka replied calmly. The man left in anger, muttering threats, but Chuka remained unmoved. Adana watched him with admiration. She had seen him stand against storms, but this time, she saw him stand for faith. As months passed, their small project became a movement. Women opened shops, farmers bought new tools, children returned to school. The once-forgotten village of Umuaka began to shine. Even the elders marvelled. When the humble rise, one said, they lift others with them. Mama Nkechi's eyes glowed with pride each time she saw her daughter walk through the marketplace, teaching others how to sow, save, and dream. My child, she said one afternoon, your husband built wealth, but you built hearts. Adana smiled shyly. We just planted where God gave us land. One night, as the moon hung bright over the village, Chuka and Adana sat outside watching fireflies drift above the fields. The sound of distant drums floated through the air. A celebration from another village that had joined their cooperative. Do you ever miss the city? Adana asked. He chuckled. Sometimes. The lights, the noise, the rush. But I prefer this peace. Here, I hear my soul. She leaned closer. And your soul says what? He turned to her, eyes glistening. That the woman I married when I had nothing is the same woman who taught me what everything truly means. Her eyes softened with tears. And the man I thought poor, she whispered, was the richest of all. They sat there for a long time, saying nothing more, only listening to the night's quiet music, crickets, wind, and heartbeats in harmony. Above them, the stars shimmered like witnesses to their journey. Once they had lost everything the world values, gold, titles, status, only to find what heaven values most, humility, purpose, and love that survived the fire. As the night deepened, Chuka spoke softly, his words like a prayer. Maybe wealth was never meant to make us proud, Adana. Maybe it was meant to make us useful. She smiled through tears. Then we've learned what the rich never teach, that the truest riches live in the heart. And far away, as if heaven agreed, thunder rolled gently, not as a warning this time, but as applause. The rains came early that year, and with them, a new season of abundance. The fields around Umuaka turned green again, and laughter once more filled the air. The cooperative Chuka and Adana founded had become the heart of the village. Men brought their harvests there. Women saved their profits from the market. The old and the young alike came to listen to Chuka's lessons on honesty, faith, and endurance. People said his words carried power, not because he was rich again, but because he had lived the truth he spoke. A man who has fallen and risen again, the elders would say, is a teacher even kings should listen to. One afternoon, the village hosted a festival to honor their transformation. Dancers filled the square, children sang songs of gratitude, and a banner hung from a tree that read, "When one man found humility, a whole people found hope." Chuka stood before the crowd, humbled, his simple white kaftan fluttering in the breeze. "We once thought riches made us strong," he said, his voice deep and steady. "But now we know. Only unity and love make a people unbreakable." The crowd cheered, their hands raised high. Adana stood beside him, her wrapper glowing like sunset fabric, her heart full of pride. In that moment, she realized that what they had rebuilt was more than a livelihood. It was a legacy. The news of their success spread beyond Umuaka. Soon journalists, investors, and government officials visited to see the miracle village for themselves. One day, a governor arrived with his entourage, offering Chuka an award for community leadership and national service. Cameras flashed, drums rolled, and the people danced. But Chuka lifted the plaque high and said, "This is not mine alone. It belongs to everyone who believed that goodness can rise from ashes." When they returned home that evening, Adana looked at the award resting on their small wooden table and smiled. "Do you see, my husband? What began as shame became testimony." He took her hand gently, and what was buried by lies has been watered by faith. Despite the joy, Chuka never forgot his past. Every week, he still walked to the forest to tap palm wine, not because he needed it, but to remember where he came from. "If I forget the sound of the forest," he once told Adana, I might forget the sound of humility. Sometimes, young men followed him, eager to learn. He would smile and say, "The secret of success is not in what you carry home, but what you leave behind for others." The villagers began calling him Na-Oha, father of all. Adana's sewing school also flourished. She taught girls from nearby towns who came to learn more than tailoring. They came to learn dignity. She always told them, a woman's strength is not in gold, but in grace. One evening, as the sun melted into crimson clouds, Mama Nkechi visited. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes still sparkled with wisdom. "My children," she said, sitting beside the fire, "I have seen poverty, and I have seen wealth, and now I see peace. You have made me proud." Adana smiled, holding her mother's hands. "Mama, it was your prayers that built this." The old woman chuckled softly. "No, my daughter, it was your endurance. When a woman stands, a family stands. When a family stands, a nation stands." Her words filled the hut like a blessing. That night, as they lay under the stars, Adana whispered, "Do you ever think about the mansion?" Chuka smiled faintly. "Sometimes," he said, "but I would rather build 10 huts filled with laughter than one palace filled with loneliness." She rested her head on his chest. "Then we have everything," she said. "We lost gold and found God's timing." He nodded, his hand tracing gentle circles on her back. "Yes, and God's timing never misses." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the sounds of drums from distant villages that now followed their example. Umuaka had become a beacon, a place reborn through love, faith, and humility. As sleep claimed them, the stars above seemed to whisper the story of the poor village girl who was forced to marry a poor man, only to discover that poverty had been heaven's disguise for destiny. The sun rose gently over Umuaka, bathing the red earth in a glow of quiet glory. The air was cool and still, broken only by the rustle of palm leaves and the distant laughter of children heading to school. The village had changed. New houses stood where there once were huts. The marketplace thrived with trade, and joy had become the rhythm of daily life. Yet, at the heart of it all stood the same small home where it began, Chuka and Adana's humble hut, now a symbol of what faith and love could build from ashes. That morning, Adana stepped outside, her wrapper tied neatly, her smile calm and content. The scent of roasted maize filled the air. From the distance came the sound of singing, a group of women marching toward the cooperative, their voices rising in harmony. He who walks with truth never walks alone. Chuka emerged from the doorway, older now with streaks of grey in his hair but still strong, his spirit unshaken. He watched his wife for a moment. The woman who once cried beneath moonlight now radiated peace. "The harvest looks good this year," he said, his voice warm. She turned to him, her eyes soft with pride. "It's not just the harvest of crops," she said, "but of patience." He nodded, smiling. Patience built this land more than money ever could. Together they walked toward the cooperative, where the villagers had gathered for the annual Thanksgiving. Drums rolled softly, and the air carried the scent of palm wine and roasted yam. Children ran around their legs, shouting, "Papa Chuka! Mama Adana!" The couple laughed, waving to them. They were no longer just husband and wife. They had become a living story, a legend whispered by mothers to their children each night. At the celebration, the village chief rose to speak. "Many years ago," he began, "a poor girl was forced to marry a man everyone mocked. We called him the palm wine tapper, not knowing we mocked a king in disguise. Today, because of them, our children no longer leave the village in search of hope. Hope lives here." The crowd erupted in cheers. Chuka and Adana stood hand in hand, tears glistening in their eyes. Adana felt her heart swell, not with pride, but with gratitude. She leaned closer to her husband and whispered, "Do you remember the day they forced me to marry you?" He chuckled softly. How could I forget? You looked at me as if I was your punishment. She laughed, her eyes glistening. And yet, you became my miracle. Later that evening, as the celebration faded into quiet, Chuka and Adana sat beneath the old mango tree, the same one where their journey had begun. The fireflies glowed around them like tiny stars, and the moon hung low, silvering the fields. Adana, Chuka said softly, I've learned many lessons in this life, but one stands above all. She turned to him. What lesson is that? He smiled, his eyes reflecting the firelight. That sometimes God hides blessings behind broken doors. The key is not to stop knocking. She smiled through her tears. And when he finally opens it? Then you understand why the waiting had to hurt, he replied gently. They sat in silence for a long while, listening to the night breathe. As dawn approached, the first light touched their faces, two souls who had walked through dust and fire, yet came out gold. Their story had become more than their own. It was now a proverb, a teaching. Mothers told it to their daughters. Do not despise humble beginnings, for even a poor man's hut can hold a king. Fathers told it to their sons. Do not seek a woman for her beauty, but for the heart that endures when wealth fades. In the years to come, travellers would pass through Umuaka and ask, where did this village find its fortune? And the villagers would smile and point to the mango tree, saying, it started there, with love that refused to die. In the end, Chuka and Adana grew old together, surrounded by laughter and legacy. When they spoke of their past, they did so with gratitude, not grief. For they had learned that riches are not measured in coins or mansions, but in the peace of two hearts that beat as one. And when their story was finally told to the next generation, it ended with the words that had carried them through every storm. God may delay, but he never forgets. He